Welcome to our Hacktoberfest Twitch stream. This is actually our second one for the day. Ace did an amazing intro to Git Twitch stream. So if you want a little refresher to Git, definitely feel free to go back and rewatch that. It should be uploaded on our YouTube eventually. It's on our LinkedIn and our Twitch. But the topic for today is going to be a bit of tips for open source maintainers. And you might be saying, like, how is this relevant to TBD? Why are we talking about this? But TBD has a ton of open source projects. And I think it's important for us to support the larger open source ecosystem and community, because if all of open source is thriving, then we are too. And today I brought on someone who I will say is an open source expert. Like, you maintain a whole bunch of, you maintain virtual coffee and you work at OpenSauced. So I think you have a great amount of experience, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yay. Thanks, Rizel, for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Bekah. I am the developer experience lead at OpenSauced, and I am a career transitioner. I came into tech a handful of years ago after teaching college English for 10 years. And for me, I really love the open source experience. And being a maintainer has not only helped me to grow as a person in tech, but it's also really been fulfilling for me to help onboard new contributors and see people grow in their journey. And so I'm very excited to continue to be doing that.
Yeah, I'm glad. And yeah, you do so much. Okay, so I'm going to highlight some comments. One from Angie saying, Bekah, hi. And then one from Coda Girl 1991 saying, Bekah is an open source queen. I agree. All right,
Thanks,
so before we talk open source, I know we only have 30 minutes, but I like to start with a little bit of I don't know, a little opener. I wanted to ask you, how's Squattober going for you?
Okay, so this is why October is my favorite month, because we have Hacktoberfest and we have Squattober. So if you're not familiar with Squattober, Sornex, the brand, does a all month emphasis on squats every day, and I like to lift weights, so I am squatting every single day except Sundays, I think, in October, and it's going great. I feel like I might up my PR from what I was shooting for. And PR, not pull request, as in personal record. So I'm all about the PRs in October.
Yeah, you're trying to reach both PRs, personal record and pull request. That's
awesome. Right.
Love to hear it. Okay, cool. You introduced yourself and all that. Let's jump into the open source. And I'm just curious about what impact open source has had on your career overall.
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the first pieces of advice I had when I was about to graduate bootcamp was get involved in open source. And I never really had the opportunity to because I was offered a job pretty early on. And I'm very grateful for that. But I had tried to get into it and explore it, and I felt really overwhelmed. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to be doing this? Nobody taught me the thing. And there's a lot of there's a barrier to entry in open source when you're trying to learn. There's a language that you have to learn, a vocabulary, right? And I didn't have that, and I didn't really know how to navigate that. So for me, it took a little while. After doing virtual coffee, we started virtual coffee in April of 2020 during the pandemic. I lost my job, and I said, anyone want to meet up for virtual coffee? And we're still going. We meet up a couple of times a week, and we do events and things. But in that first year, so it would have been October of 2020, we did our first Hacktoberfest event, and it really solidified virtual coffee and who we were, because before it was we are a pandemic group of people that meets up. Once the pandemic is gone, this probably won't happen anymore. But once Hacktoberfest happened and we all came together to do this event, I realized a lot. And that was one, there was a community of people that were devoted to helping each other grow. And open source can be a really great way to do that. And like two, there can be a space where we can support each other through horizontal mentorship. And that goes along with the first one. And then also, we can contribute to the tech ecosystem and influence it in ways that we can never do on our own. So for us in that moment, it was like, hey, this is something that we're going to keep doing and we're still doing today.
I love that point you made. Well, the 2 points about horizontal mentorship and then being able to contribute to the ecosystem, like as a community. Like, I do think that's really important. I do think it's hard to find mentorship, especially when you're new. So just having a peer, it doesn't always have to be somebody that's like senior engineering manager or whatever. It could be somebody that's going through the same thing at the same time as you, but they might have like a slightly different perspective or experience. So
Yeah,
love
absolutely. So my brother and I used to write screenplays together.
it.
And we listened to this podcast called Script Notes with John August and Craig Mazin. And one of the things that they always said, they're encouraging new writers. And they said, like, don't try and get feedback or to network with people who are all the way at the top, right? Like, that's really hard. Talk to the people who are like a half a step or a step in front of you, because those people remember what it feels like to be in that position. And also, they're eventually going to be up there too, and they're going to be able to help bring you up with them as well. And so I feel like that advice really it goes beyond screenwriting. That's pretty much great advice for anything that you're doing when you're new. It's just look for that person that's right in front of you.
I love that. That's like a cute like analogy to all of that. Okay, so okay, you kind of even talked about what led you to becoming a maintainer, because you essentially you created virtual coffee just to meet up with people, and you realize that impact you have. Do you have any tips for how you create an inclusive environment in for incoming contributors or whatever? I feel like when I go to virtual coffee or I send people there, I'm like, I know that's like a really welcoming community. So what are the things you do to make it be that way?
I think one of like the top tips is to be a good listener. You almost have to become a lurker in your own project or your own community to see what people are saying, how they're talking about things. And I have a whole framework for how I evaluate communities. And one of those is like, how do people talk about the community? Do they talk about it as like, we are doing this thing, or do they talk about it as they are doing this thing? Because once you have we, then you have buy-in from your community members, and you can identify like, okay, those are the people that feel a part of this community. So really like thinking about how they made that transition from they to we can be a really good thing. The other part of that, I had Rachel Neighbors on a Twitter space recently, and they had this really, they verbalized this concept that I hadn't really thought about before, but it's about creating the contributor journey for someone, right? And so thinking about like, okay, so a new contributor today could be a maintainer in the future, but how have you supported them in that journey? And we talk about mentorship. Mentorship can be, sometimes we just don't have time to mentor one-on-one all the time, right? And I honestly, like I have thoughts on mentorship. I don't necessarily think that one-on-one mentorship is the best way to view mentorship, because you're getting one person's perspective rather than a large group of perspectives. So I prefer community mentorship in most situations, but there's a lot to unpack there, so we don't have to go there. But if you think about it in a different way, like how does your documentation set people up to progress in your open source ecosystem? Are you equipping them with what they need to make this a journey where they're growing, where they're developing their strengths, or are you setting it up to be a one-stop shop?
I love that, the contributor journey. I got to start thinking in that way. Rachel always has a lot of great insight, and I like your perspective of community mentorship. I have never really thought about it that much. I usually just get a lot of different mentors so that I can have a lot of different perspectives perspective, but it makes more sense to just have like a community rather than that. I want to quickly say hi to some people. So Ace, who's my coworker, is tuning in. Also, again, just want to remind y'all, if you need a refresher to get, Ace just did an amazing one, so you can go ahead and rewatch the recording. And then he said listening is key, I think, while you were speaking. And then I see Coda Girl say, hey, Chrissy. I don't see Chrissy's comment, but hey, Chrissy, thanks for tuning in. All right. My other question to you, I think you were talking about documentation. So if it's okay, skip to this question on documentation. I think sometimes when you create an application, you kind of write documentation in a way that doesn't think about that new contributor, that person that doesn't have context about the app. What are your strategies? And I guess you kind of mentioned them, but if there's a few more, what are your strategies to just think from a different perspective as like you're a new contributor and you have no clue what's going on?
Yeah, I think that there's a process there. And first of all, I want to say if you're a new contributor and you've never contributed before, that it is okay to feel overwhelmed. And that's actually a pretty normal feeling, right? Like you're learning a new process. Everybody does does things slightly different. And so you're going to have to work through that. This is a total aside, but we were just talking about documentation in virtual coffee. And one of the people in my breakout room was saying that documentation is more important than the code, because if you have good documentation, I could rewrite your code in any way that I want, right? And like the goal is that you understand what's happening and you're able to implement that thing. But in terms of like being a new contributor, so you always want to check out the contributing guide, you want to check out the README. And I encourage a lot of people to, once you go through that, if you have questions, then ask those questions. And I know that B Dougie has a blog post that is Good First Issues Don't Exist. And the idea there is the best issue that you can tackle is the one that you write yourself. So I found that a lot of first-time contributors who I have mentored, they're like, I just don't even understand. I read the contributing guide, I read the documentation, and it's not clear. And I'm like, raise an issue, right? Like that's the perfect time to write an issue because you've seen a weakness in the contributing guide or the documentation, and this is time for you to raise it. It's not only going to help you get answers, you could probably get a PR out of that, but also it's going to help every single new contributor after you. And so like that's also part of the journey, like lift up all of the people that are going to come after you as well.
I love that. Lifting up people that are going to come after you, like creating that space for other people. That's an amazing approach. And I can see why virtual coffee is so inclusive when people want to be in it, and open source too. Here's a comment from Chrissy saying a contributor today can be a maintainer in the future. And then one of the maintainers I work with at Links Hub was a contributor at Girl Script Summer of Code. Cool. Wait, isn't that's the quote you just said, right? And then she just quoted you?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was like, wait a minute.
It was just that first part. And shout out to Chrissy, who is one of the new maintainers that I onboarded yesterday. So she is one of our community maintainers at OpenSauced, and IU is as well. So she's both are members of Virtual Coffee and members of OpenSauced and are just crushing it.
Yay, congrats, Chrissy and IU. You know what? That's like growth, because I remember like Chrissy like trying to get into open source or even asking like, how do I become a maintainer one day? And now like you are. Cool. All right. Another question I have is around automation. I think maintainers, they like often experience burnout, and so they try to automate some of the things away, which I'm totally for, like GitHub actions and all of that, like maybe having some saved replies so that you're not like manually typing out things. But there's also that downside of like maybe the automation can take away from that like human aspect of like interacting as a contributor and maintainer. Do you have any like perspectives on this? Like what things do you choose to automate and what things do you say, no, that needs a human touch?
I think this is one of those things that's really tricky, and I want to shout out Jessica for sharing with me her list of saved replies. And I also want to shout out you, Rizel, because I was trying to use the GitHub documentation to create a saved reply, and it was not working. Like my UI did not look like the documentation. And then Brian sent me your blog post, and I'm like, okay, I got that. So you both led me on the path that I needed to have my saved replies. Um, and I think like, this is hard, especially with new contributors, because I think it's nice to have that personal touch, but at the same time, like there has to be some sort of recognition that maintainers are often um their time is in high demand, right? And so you want to balance both of those things, and you want to personalize. But you know what? Like, I am often doing things on the go. I'm replying to things in the pickup line of my kid's school, right? Like, and that's from the GitHub app. And I just, it, from the maintainer's perspective, is it better to respond more quickly with a saved reply, or to wait until you have more time to give an answer? And I think that part of this has to become a conversation within the community of like, hey, there are saved replies for a reason. And like, we encourage this type of mentorship in this particular organization. But we also want you to know that in order to provide that mentorship, we have to be able to utilize these automations so we can spend that extra time in other places, right? And so there's like a real value proposition that has to happen there. And so I think Chrissy actually mentioned in our, maybe it was in the Twitter space earlier this week, is like, hey, you can have a saved reply, but also as part of that, I think in her saved reply, she has like in brackets or something, the person's name. So it would be like, hi, brackets name, and then the saved reply. And that's a reminder to her to add their name there. So like if you want to try and have the best of both worlds, then there's that compromise there that allows you to put their name in. But I also like want to say that, there's that trade-off, and you just have to decide as a maintainer, like what is the best use of your time in this moment, and how can you make that decision? And so it's not going to be the same thing every time. And if there's a way for you to explain that to your community members, then that's fantastic. But also like preserve that energy so you don't get burnt out, or you just like, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm like, I'm gonna get to this after I get home. And then like I get home and I'm like, ah, and it doesn't happen. It just falls off of the radar.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. There's a lot to do. Like people have jobs and lives and families, and it's good to invest in your community, but it's also like you have to invest in yourself, because then you can't invest in your community if you're drained or
Yeah.
not feeling well or whatever. And I like what you said about it. Like it depends on the person, depends on the community. Sometimes it has to be a conversation with the community too. So that was good. I also want to say hi to Ayu. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Look at all the people that you've impacted throughout your career. Jessica Cody Girl 1991 said, I like using saved replies when new contributors have a PR approved and merged. I like to congratulate them on the PR and welcome future contributions. Yeah, I like that. I like that too. Couple more questions, and this again is going to be a pretty short stream. Talking about, I think you kind of started talking about this, but I do want to talk more about maintainer burnout. Any tips for managing it, especially during Hacktoberfest, when that's like everybody's trying to like get their contribution in, and there's spam, and there's a whole bunch going on.
Yeah, I think that's hard. And I think that recognizing that you have burnout is a important part of the process, right? And I know that it's hard. I've definitely been in the midst of burnout and just not realized it until I wasn't burnt out anymore. And that like required me changing jobs. So I think that, having that checklist, and also like having people around you that are willing to say like, either sometimes it's obviously nice if somebody can take things off of your plate. that doesn't happen all the time, especially for solo maintainers. So one, like, it is important to educate contributors and like, hey, I'm going to get to this when I get to this, right? Like, I'm going to be on vacation this week, or I don't merge in any pull requests on the weekends. I try to make that a rule for myself. Sometimes I break that rule, but like the general rule is I'm not going to touch the PRs on the weekends because it's important for me to have that time and space away from that. Um, and I think that having people just to say like, hey, I've noticed that you seem to be struggling, and I wanted to make sure that I pointed out to you in case you don't know, or if there's anything that I can do to support that. So even like sometimes having someone point it out to me, like, oh yeah, I have been in a really bad mood for the last month and a half. Maybe I should do something about that, right? um Oh, okay. Yeah. And Jessica has a great comment there. As a maintainer, I like to dedicate times of the day to do reviews and that's helped her not with not burning out during Hacktoberfest. And that's super important too. So if you can create those limits for yourself and then clearly communicate them, and I think that's part of it, like what are your limits? How can you clearly communicate that with the people that you are working with? Then that will help to decrease that burnout. When you're feeling that burnout, then it's time to work with other people. And I find that like we oftentimes feel like we need to isolate when we're feeling burnt out or stressed or depressed or whatever. And like really what we need is to be with other people. So like finding those trusted people, sometimes it just takes a vent session. Like I would like to vent all of these things. I don't need advice about it. I just need to get it off my chest. Or like I would like to vent and I would like some advice. Can you help me with this thing? And so like having that human connection, I think really helps to decrease burnout.
I love that advice. I think it's even just general good life advice where it's like once set expectations, set boundaries of what you're going to do. That way no one's questioning because you've already said what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And then you have those people that are keeping you accountable that are like, didn't you say you wasn't going to be doing that at midnight? You're
Yeah.
looking tired. I want to say hi to Nick as well. Hey, thanks for tuning in. But yeah, that was amazing advice and advice I need to take for myself, but never really do.
Well, I'll be your accountability partner. We can do it for each other.
Thank you. Yeah, DM me when you're like, Rizel, calm down. All right. One question I wanted to ask as well is like, I think working at OpenSauced, you probably get a great overview of all the cool open source projects there are out there. Are there any open source projects that you admire or think are doing open source right or think people should check out?
So Astro Docs has been I've been like deep diving into their docs because I think they do such a great job. I had Ben Holmes on a Twitter space recently, and it just so many great tips. And everybody I've never heard anybody say one bad thing about the Astro community. So I'm sure that there's somebody out there that had a bad experience, but it's overwhelmingly positive, and it's very deliberate in how they set up all of the things that they do. So I've really spent some time in there. Rachel Neighbors just got hired at Clerk, and their team just was stunning already. And so I feel like that's the next project that I'm going to be looking into, just to kind of like spy on like, okay, how is this great team doing all of the things that they're doing? How are they cultivating their community? And I think that there's so many learning opportunities out there. You just look at everybody that you hear positive things about, and you explore like, what are they doing and why is it making it so great? And then how can I take that to my project and make it a great space for other people here as well?
Yes to everything you said. I love the Astro documentation. Like I was looking at their tutorials and they don't just they start you from the beginning of like, you don't know how to do Git, here's how you do it. Open up your editor, type this in. They have little checkpoints, they have little knowledge checks or like quizzes. I think it's such an excellent way to do documentation, and I wish more docs were like that because I remember starting off as an engineer, like everyone's like, read the docs, and I'm like, I'm reading it, but I don't know what
Yep.
it says. Like I'm like, I read it, but what is it? So I love that. I'm gonna take this time to do a little plug for TBD. Oh my God! Hey, Nutlope. Your Versal is great too. And I want to say, like, a lot of the projects that you put out are amazing. And I wish as a developer advocate, I could be like, yo, I got y'all with Room GPT or whatever. Like, it's just awesome. But I did want to do a quick plug for TBD, as well, as we're talking about amazing projects or things that people can contribute to. If you're looking to contribute to a project, we have developer.tbd.website. That's our documentation website. I think it's pretty great. Angie's leading the team. But if you want to continue to help us be great and get to Astro level, feel free to like pick up an issue in our GitHub. And you can feel free as well to join our Discord at this link. I do see Chrissy say, to an earlier point about improving contributing guidelines, I think adding a link to to virtual IDEs like Gitpod makes the process less intimidating for beginners. And then she also says Free Code Camp does this, and it's been immensely helpful. Yes, actually, I agree with like having like Code Sandbox, GitHub Code Spaces, or Gitpod. That way people don't have to go through that whole like setup process. I realize we have like 2 minutes left. So, because I don't want to take up your time, Bekah. You had a busy day. I want to just ask you, the last question is like, do you have any tips for finding a repository or an issue to contribute to?
Yeah, so Rizel in the private chat, I just threw in a link. If you don't mind throwing that into the main chat, I just don't have access to it right now. I have a list of Hacktoberfest repositories for beginners. And TBD is listed in there as well. So it's just a handful of places that you can go to get that we know have supportive teams that are willing to work with you. I know the ones that we have there. So, for example, our OpenSauced intro repository, it's a course. So it walks you through all of the things that an overview of open source, how to contribute, what that means, doing things like forking, cloning, committing, and submitting PRs for the very first time. So it's supposed to be very beginner friendly. And I think that that's a really great way to find an issue. The second piece of advice is talk to people who are already doing those things. Jessica Wilkins, who is in the chat, we had this at Virtual Coffee, we had a monthly challenge a couple months ago. It was built in public, and my goal was to submit a PR to a repository I hadn't submitted to before. And so I put that out there, and she was like, hey, at Free Code Camp, we have this issue. Do you want it? I was like, yes. So it took me 30 seconds to find the issue to work on. And sometimes it's just about asking the people that you know, or looking at these repositories and say like, hey, I know that person that is contributing here. I'm going to reach out to them and see. So if you are nervous, like find somebody that's submitted to that repository before and go about it that way.
I really like that advice. That's usually my approach. I'm usually like, hey, so you seem pretty into this community. Help me out. And definitely go to that link, y'all. OpenSauced is like a great resource for being able to navigate your open source journey. So I love it. Thanks for adding TBD there. I think I want to ask you a very important question to close. And that question is, in this preparation for your stream tomorrow with Kadesha, what's your favorite Beyonce song? I didn't prepare you. My bad.
You didn't prepare me for this. I don't feel prepared at all for this. And my stream got moved to the 20th, maybe.
Oh, no.
So
Okay.
I feel like I've got time to think about that now. Rizel,
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question, and now I feel bad about it.
That's okay. Don't feel bad.
All of them. They're all my favorites.
It's hard to choose. I always get surprised when I ask somebody and they're like, what about you? And I'm like, what about me? Oh.
That would have been the right response, I think.
Jessica,
Run the World is a great song.
That's a good one. And we just have someone laughing. All right. Thank you. And thank you for, well, thanks for joining the TBD Discord, Chrissy. Thank you so much Bekah for taking the time to chat with me today. And I hope this was helpful for folks. And I mean, I think it will be. So definitely go back, listen, like absorb some of the advice and wisdom that Bekah gave us on like maintaining projects and just navigating open source overall. We will see you all next time. Oh, and Chrissy said Virgo's Groove. That's a good one too. Okay. All right, y'all. Bye.